Safer Together, Strengthening Europe's Civilian and Military Preparedness and Readiness. President Niinistö, dear Sauli, welcome to the European Parliament. The urgent message of your report could not be timelier. We are faced with the consequences of the ongoing invasion of Ukraine to our east, and the Middle East is still at boiling point. On the civilian front, we have witnessed floods across Europe over the last months, most recently in Spain, that took the lives of so many. Europe is facing a new reality. We are dealing with geopolitical tensions that see little sign of easing, and we must be ready for any eventuality. All of this makes it more important than ever that our Union is prepared for this new, more uncertain future, working together across borders and sectors to anticipate, prevent, withstand and respond to the significant threats that can lie ahead. Now, we as the European Parliament, and you will see this during the debate today, dear President, we stand ready to play our part in order to ensure Europe is able to act when called upon. So, dear Mr. Niinistö, the European Parliament is eager to listen to your proposals on how we can make these ambitions a reality, how we can better protect our citizens, and how we can build a more prepared, crisis-resistant Europe. The floor is yours.
Dear President, honourable members, thank you so much for giving this opportunity to me. Thank you for your kind invitation. It is an honour to be back here in the Parliament after visiting many years ago. As the EU's legislative chamber, you clearly play a vital role in our joint effort to strengthen our preparedness and readiness. I hope to provide you with a clear picture of the challenges we face in this regard, but also what measures we could envisage with your help and support. I started my work last spring with one very simple idea that seems to have been forgotten at times in the EU. Namely, security is the foundation for everything we consider important. Without it, our open democratic societies would not be able to flourish. The quest for security and peace was behind Europe's integration after the Second World War. When Russia rolled its tanks into Ukraine in February 2022, we were reminded once again that security is not a given. We need to invest in it and never take it for granted. So today, once again, it's a defining task for the EU to provide security to Europeans and be prepared for all the risks and threats we are facing. And the threats we face are numerous. They are not only hypothetical, but we are confronted with them here and now. We see rising geopolitical tensions that are driven by Russia's aggression against Ukraine, while the rules-based global order is fragmenting, and we see ever-worsening effects of the climate change. They were on display with the horrendous floodings in Valencia and elsewhere in Spain. I offer my condolences to the families of the victims. As global warming continues, we need to anticipate its pervasive effects on our ecosystems and invest in climate adaptation and mitigation. Indeed, If we learn one lesson from the recent past, it is that we need to be realistic and clear-eyed about the risks we face. We need to prepare for the worst to prevent the worst from happening. Another key lesson is that in the middle of a severe crisis, we depend on the same critical functions, such as reliable critical infrastructure, provision of basic services and protection to population, security of supply and social cohesion. Moreover, shocks in one sector of the economy often cascade to other sectors, and shocks to one member state will have knock-on effects throughout the European Union. I therefore try to make it clear in my report that we share a single security in the EU. If one member state loses its security, we all are in trouble. Our deep integration also offers opportunities to work together and prepare ourselves for when a crisis hits one of us or the Union as a whole. After all, member states have made profound pledges of solidarity and mutual assistance to one another in the EU treaties. We are not building the EU preparedness from scratch, especially in the past 5 years as reactions to the pandemic, raging forest fires and Russia's war against Ukraine. The EU has already enacted several major pieces of legislation and introduced new tools. The EU came out stronger from these crises, but the EU's action was initially about reaction and ad hoc solutions. We need now to move from reaction to proactive preparedness and realize that geopolitical and climate developments are often outpacing our action. The starting point for my report is therefore to address the full range of threats and challenges, including possible worst-case scenarios, such as a prolonged drought, a new pandemic, a major cyber attack or sabotage causing a blackout of a vital network, or even armed aggression against one or more EU member states. Such crises are not as unthinkable as they once were, and they can happen very well at the same time. The central objective is to ensure the Union can continue to function under all circumstances. To achieve this, we need to shift to what I call in the report comprehensive preparedness. This means the ability to bring all relevant actors and resources together to prepare for and address the most serious crises. Crises do not happen in silos, so we can only prepare for them successfully by being able to act together. This is a shared responsibility of the various EU-level actors, including the Commission and the Parliament, as well as the Member States. But importantly, it also involves the private sector, civil society, and individual citizens. This is what the whole of government and the whole of society approach is about. Strengthening civil-military cooperation is an integral part of this. Civilian and military crisis responders need to be able to operate seamlessly together, and this applies by extension also to the EU and NATO. The forthcoming Preparedness Union strategy should define at EU level the key societal and governmental functions for which continuity should be ensured under all circumstances. This applies to the basic needs of citizens, but also services provided by the government or private sector. Such a list is currently missing. The report also explores the scope of a potential preparedness law. This could be a framework to agree on standards, targets, and to streamline decision-making, coordination, and information sharing. The key is to link EU and national levels. Preparedness and security should be mainstreamed and designed into all EU legislation and future investment programmes. The aim is to ensure that our structures, coordination mechanisms, and sectoral policies and legislation are fit for purpose but also fit well together. This enables the speed of action that is so vital when a crisis erupts. Citizens and the private sector also play a major role in achieving a higher level of preparedness. There is much more we can achieve in this regard as set out in the report. From strengthening household preparedness and alert systems to the media literacy of citizens, but also enhancing volunteering opportunities by leveraging EU programmes such as the EU Solidarity Corps, and career opportunities in cybersecurity, defence industry, or armed forces, for instance. The key here is to create a sense of ownership and participation among citizens in strengthening their own security. It builds cohesion and reinforces societal resilience. This is at the heart of the Finnish national way of preparedness, in my view. It's not a model, a structure that we can transpose as such at the EU level. It's rather an attitude. It's done by the people. And they can only work well together when there's a high level of trust. The trust we need for the EU's preparedness must begin with the trust of citizens that their political community is worth protecting and defending. Trust is also the key to strengthening public-private partnership. I see a lot of opportunities here too. The lines between economy and security are blurring. The private sector realizes all too well that they are exposed to supply chain shocks, cyber attacks, resource scarcities, and economic security risks. The private sector can help by sharing their data on production rates and information on vulnerabilities and supply chain dependencies. The EU side can help by extending resiliency policies and creating a stronger ability to absorb shocks, for example, through a comprehensive EU stockpiling strategy. Our open democratic societies are based on the respect for the rights and liberties of individuals. We provide a broad open space for people to be free. But at the same time, this open space is constantly used by malicious actors to hurt us and to undermine the trust of people against the whole foundations of our democracies. A key question is to make sure that we protect our values without letting them be weaponized against us. We need to deter malicious actors who are currently conducting hybrid campaign against us with relative impunity. The report identifies a range of recommended actions in this regard, both to reduce our vulnerabilities and to upgrade our response. To outsmart our adversaries, The report proposes to gradually strengthen EU intelligence cooperation towards a fully fledged EU service for intelligence cooperation. This has received a lot of attention in the media. I want to be clear, this is not about a CIA-style agency, but about better working together. And we have to keep in mind that in EU, for decision-making, all the relevant, up-to-date information is most crucial. Yet we need to ensure that EU leadership has the best intelligence picture possible. That is the target. At the same time, for our security and military services. This is only one example of how we can work together to outsmart our adversaries. But knowing that they are up to this, not enough to deter them from aggression. Vladimir Putin made it clear a long time ago that he sees the West and the Western people as weak. We must change that perception. The cooperative security model that the EU and NATO aspired to after the end of the Cold War was shattered in February 2022. Putin is moving Russia to a war economy footing and soliciting assistance from autocratic friends across Eurasia. Strengthening Europe's defence is therefore an urgent but also monumental task. After years of underinvestment, we must now scale up our industrial capacity, both to develop cutting-edge military capabilities and to mass-produce battlefield goods like artillery, ammunition and cost-efficient drones. This also signals to the US, especially after the outcome of the presidential elections, that Europe is ready to share the burden and to take strategic responsibility. Only by showing that we do everything we can to prepare ourselves can we be a good partner for others. This should be more than words on paper. It needs to be backed up by new joined-up investments to rationalize the fragmentation among member states. The multitude of different military platforms in Europe poses a problem not only for our competitiveness, but also our crisis preparedness and defence readiness. One key recommendation is to use the forthcoming white paper of the future of European defence to develop a EU defence capability package for the next decade. This is necessary both for our ability to support Ukraine for as long as needed, as well as to enhance our deterrence. The Union should furthermore map out more clearly how it would assist a member state that is the victim of armed aggression and protect the Union as a whole. There has been silence concerning the Lisbon Treaty 42.7 article. This silence should now end. The EU is not a military actor in the sense that NATO is, but if a member state of the EU and NATO would be attacked, this would have colossal implications for both organizations. NATO remains the cornerstone for the collective defence of its members. But the defence of Europe is not only about military capabilities and headquarters. It involves a range of dual-use or civilian policies that become critical in such a moment, from defence industry, civil protection, humanitarian assistance, military mobility, medical support and economic resources to diplomacy, sanctions, and so on. We must define clearly, as part of our EU-NATO cooperation, how we would work together to support the attacked member state, including with all the means that the EU has in its disposal. Dear President, honourable members, we are in a pivotal moment in European history. Military threats are as high as they have been since the end of the Cold War. Climate change is wreaking havoc through floods and forest fires. Strategic competition is seeping into every part of the globe and affecting all our policies. A credible and comprehensive preparedness strategy will convince any potential adversary you are not able to outsmart or outlast us, because we are prepared. We need a clear commitment to strengthen the EU's preparedness across the board. I hope that we can count on the support of the Parliament in this respect. It sends an important message to our citizens. We will be safer together. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Niinistö, for that excellent point that you gave us. We'll now give space for all the representatives of the political groups, starting with the EPP, to do a first round of groups. Lena Dupont for 2 minutes.
Thanks, Madam President. Dear Mr. Niinistö, disruption of critical services, of supply chains by pandemic, by sabotage, by hybrid threats, cyber attacks or natural disasters. The reasons to be prepared are multifaceted. And I specifically thank Mr. Niinistö for the timely report, his reflection and his ideas. And I said it before and I will say it as often as it is needed, the security landscape in Europe has worsened and we need to step up preparedness. So the report focuses rightly so on the whole of government, whole of society, all-hazard approach. And I would even add, we need a whole of European Union approach, an all-European approach. So because defence and civil defence are just two sides of one medal. What does it mean? In the short term, we need to come to common risk perception and understanding. We need to bridge the geographical differences between natural disasters and man-made crises. Enhancing the coordination between the member states and the EU, between EU and NATO, between the civilian side and the military side, between society and politics. We need to further develop stockpiling alongside the risk perception, and we need to bring together people, material and structures of crisis response. We can build up upon the experience we are already having, and we need to be ready to exercise. We need to prepare our citizens via communication, via education, by raising awareness. Because in the midterm, we need to eliminate bureaucratic and administrative hurdles. We need to prepare the institutions to be capable of delivering, especially in times of crisis. We need to enhance the information exchange wherever necessary and possible. We need to develop emergency protocols. We need to step up and modernize the equipment and the materials for those who will bear a huge responsibility in times of crisis, because in the end, in the long term, it's imperative that we come to a better prepared European Union, that we preserve the European solidarity, and that we stand strong with those with a comprehensive approach to military and civilian side. And most importantly, we need to be thankful and supportive for those who really bear a huge responsibility when crisis arrives, to the defenders, the first responders, the rescuers, policemen, firemen, and the volunteers. We owe it to them.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dupont. And now on behalf of the SD Group, Eero Heinäluoma.
Puhemies, arvoisa
Chair, dear Mr. President Niinistö, thank you for your very valuable work on strengthening the Union's preparedness. Your extensive experience and discretion are reflected in the report's proposals. The European Union's preparedness is not just about money and legislation, but above all about a change of our mindset, a mindset in which our citizens take responsibility for their security and preparedness and take it seriously, as you, President Niinistö, have said so often. And then we have to look at our treaties. What do they oblige us to do in the future and within security? We have a mutual assistance clause in the treaties. Do we have procedures in place for that clause? What will we do in practice if a member state is attacked from the outside? We do not have time for silence then. This is something that the new Defense Commissioner will have to work with. This is one of the first things that we will have to give an answer to.
Kiitos. Next for the PFE group, Pierre-Romain Thionnet.
La sécurité.
Security is the foundation for everything. And, President, this is welcome. Those who shared this idea have been mocked. But rehashing errors is in nobody's interests. When national sovereignty can be avoided, then this is something we must condemn. Yes, external threats really make people think more clearly, and threats from Russia have shown this. You talk about the instrumentalization of migration, but this is just one aspect of the problem. Looking at the figures, legal and immigration, immigration is putting the whole continent at risk. It is breaking European culture, and it is pitting our European people against one another. Security and identity are the foundation on which everything is built. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you.
Elena Donazzan.
Thank you, President. The Latin said, vis pacem para bellum. So we need to prepare for any event, and the President has stated that clearly in his speech and report. And Kubilius also stated this, and the Italian government asked for an exclusion of defense from the Stability Pact. We need to invest in the long term for purchase of weapons, munitions, interoperability, with the full participation of member states. We have to make sure that we uphold the chain of protection, but it's men and women that will make the difference, as you said, President. Sir, we need to have a better awareness amongst civilians. Some countries, Lithuania, Austria, Denmark, have conscription. Italy suspended that, like others. But we also to have a good reserve, auxiliary corps, to protect young people. We need to bring young people in. We have a good civil protection service in Italy that does protect people, and in the mountains there's an association, the National Alpine Association. They're excellent. They're continuing to be trained, and they are ready in the case of flood, earthquake, or COVID. All types of emergencies, as you have stated, President Niinistö. So lest hypocrisy, more sensibility, and look at our defense and looking at the organization of our population, availability of resources that should be taken out of the Stability Pact, and a self-sufficiency hopefully prepared in Europe. Thank you.
Now for the Renew Europe group, Bart Groothuis.
Thank you, Chair. Dear President, in the past 25 years, Europe's defense spending was more or less stable, while China has increased its defense spending with 600% and Russia with 300%. Russia is already at war. China is preparing for one. When President Xi would decide to move on Taiwan with a blockade and a counter-blockade from the American Navy would follow, trade flows to Europe would immediately halter and stop. Europe might have medicines for a couple of weeks, but without semiconductors or critical raw materials, our industry and businesses will be even sooner going black. Is Europe prepared for such a scenario? Dear colleagues, recently I asked in the Industry Committee, in the Defense Committee and in the Trade Committee for scenario studies on a Taiwan blockade. And I asked for your support. It would be the first direct result in this House of Mr. Niinistö's excellent report on civil and military preparedness. His thought leadership is Finland at its best, and it will be Europe at its best, but only if we implement his excellent recommendations without further ado. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor on behalf of the Green Group to Hanna Neumann.
Dear colleagues, floods, droughts, pandemics, cyber attacks, a war at our borders, crises are the new normal. And we can keep fixing problem after problem after problem, leading to collective exhaustion, or finally strengthen our preparedness and resilience. President Niinistö, you wrote an excellent report on how to get there, with 80 proposals, all boiling down to let's do it together, or we will fail, and with every day we wait, it will just get more expensive. Keeping household water supplies, building central storage houses, these are the more obvious suggestions. But what has far too long been overlooked is the aspect of cyber, and I'm glad that you address it. Just last year, hackers breached into the community IT systems in South Westphalia in Germany. That meant no ambulance, no birth certificate, no wedding, no passport, no marriage. Some of these services blocked for months. Supply chain attacks, ransomware attacks, disinformation. If these things were physical, battle tanks would be in our offices and our bedrooms. State-sponsored cyber attacks, dear colleagues, quadrupled in the last 10 years, and our EU response has not. We have the Cyber Solidarity Act, the Cyber Resilience Act, some directives, but the EU still lacks 1 million cyber experts. And cyber threats know no borders. If one member state gets attacked, it affects us all. So it's good that we have this report, but the actual work is only about to start. And we need to make it happen here, dear colleagues, because member states individually will fail.
Thank you very much, Ms. Neumann. And now, on behalf of the Left Group, Dario Tamburrano.
Salve, colleghi.
Colleagues, I'm here today to just say something slightly differently. To quote De Luca, since September, we have seen disastrous floods in Central Europe, with many that were dispersed, and also in Emilia-Romagna and with Valencia, with 200 dead. And here we are talking about munition and defense when we know that our real enemy for our continent is climate change. We've had hundreds of dead, and we should have a bolstering of civil protection, making sure that we shore up our hydrological security. We should assist our population to deal with drought, flash floods, and excessive heat. We need to have natural science, satellites, AI, drones, and rapid alert systems. Let's use them to support lives and not spend them on cannons and munitions. Thank you.
Aust.
In
the past decades, the European Union has been ignoring the coordination of security for its member states and not ensuring the maximum level of security, whether we're talking about airspace or we're looking at materials and supplies. Everywhere we are dependent on the United States. And in none of these areas are we currently able to defend our own security interests. However, the EU is actually at fault for this dependency. It's investing a lot of money in ideological projects such as gender questions or climate protection. So it's looking at all of those issues, but not looking at the important ones. It's necessary, therefore, to have less EU, less remits, fewer remits, and have less powers, but still focus on the decisive issues. For example, a coordinated defense and security policy at EU level. In other words, fewer weapon systems. Instead of 150 weapon systems currently, they could have fewer and make the armies more competitive. And we need more security policy together. It does not mean a creation of a common European army. That would be a nightmare if the EU bureaucracies and Mrs. von der Leyen had the power to decide over the deployment of European soldiers. So the more EU is involved, then the greater the risk of a chaos, and there's no one more dangerous than Mrs. von der Leyen in this case. So yes, more cooperation in the defense and security questions, but a clear no to any dreams, crazy dreams of a European army. Thank you.
And now Thomas Tobé, 1.5 minutes.
Fru talman.
Madam Speaker, Mr. Niinistö, 3 young men arrested last month after an explosion near the Israeli ambassadorship in Copenhagen. We have shooting at the representation in Stockholm from Israel. And so these acts have been carried out by gangs on behalf of the regime in Iran. The Swedish security police has confirmed very early this year that enemy states are using criminal gangs in order to carry out these explosions, these bombings, other kinds of violence in Europe. So we have, our responsibility is the security of our citizens. And Mr. Minister, in your report, it's clear that security is the basis upon everything else. And so when we have these enemy states sending out these actors to carry out these attacks, then we have to do more in order to increase our resilience. We have to strengthen and expand Europol. We have to we have to cancel free movement for members of gangs, and we have to have a stricter check on the external borders. So we have to act directly, we have to be strong and ensure that these criminal gangs are not going to act as agents of enemy states. And I hope we can agree upon that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Maniatis, please, for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, colleagues. The report on strengthening European civilian military preparedness and readiness comes at a time when our world is becoming more and more unpredictable and more dangerous. There's a constant chain of crises, geopolitical crises, economic and environmental crises. And the consequences of climate change are becoming more and more apparent, and they're becoming reality more and more often. We need to prepare for this, and we need to ensure that we tackle these issues in a targeted manner. The world is not as safe as we would like it to be. It's our duty to protect citizens from predictable and unpredictable enemies and unconventional threats. And for this reason, we welcome Mr. Niinistö's report, and he'll be able to make a contribution in this direction. We need to have a new mentality of preparedness and readiness. European institutions, national authorities, European communities and societies. We all together must focus on the goals of resilience. that we have set out as part of the European Mechanism for Civil Protection. We need strategic legislation for readiness and preparedness, and we need a joint European report on risk assessment, and we need to be prepared for the worst-case scenarios, and we must ensure that mutual assistance clauses in treaties are not just empty words. The European Union needs to be in the position to protect its members. We need to strengthen cooperation between member states with joint instruments where necessary. And we also need to make it clear that together we can achieve more swiftly and more efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tanjakuria.
Madam President, colleagues, today we are discussing a seminal issue for our union, so preparedness and defense of the EU. We have an approach, however, that looks at a differentiated approach to sovereignty that would affect not just military security, but the economy and infrastructure. Yes, we need resilience in the EU, but any measure should respect the sovereignty of the member states. Centralizing things in Brussels should not compromise the ability to answer on a national basis, meeting the needs. That should be the backbone of the EU. We are not in a favor of a centralization, but rather a strengthening of the national forces. Now, we think that, yes, incentivizing the private sector in strengthening resilience through EU funding that should be equitably distributed and transparently so. This is extremely important because that's not always the case in many cases. Also, we believe that Europe will only be strong if member states are strong. There is not a EU force without the force of the states. Together, we will be able to establish a resilient EU, but the strength of our union exists in the diversity of all of the parts that compose it.
Madam President, Commissioner, I would like to express my appreciation of President Niinistö's timely report. It rightly emphasizes the need for a comprehensive risk assessment that covers a wide spectrum of threats, including cyber attacks, geopolitical conflicts and climate-related disasters. While the EU possesses a wide array of civilian and military tools, we must strive to better integrate all available instruments. In particular, we need to intensify our efforts in the protection of critical infrastructures and enhance our defense against hybrid threats, including cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns. Regarding EU-NATO cooperation, NATO remains the cornerstone of European defence. It is vital to further nurture this relationship and align our resources and visions strategically to ensure a coherent and robust response to ongoing and future crises. In times of uncertainty, building up our societal resilience is not just important, it is essential. Engaging EU citizens, raising public awarenesses, and equipping individuals with practical knowledge are fundamental steps towards a resilient society. The proposal to establish a European civil defence mechanism to enhance coordination between military and civilian responses is noteworthy. Yet we must ensure that it complements national efforts without creating unnecessary bureaucracy or duplication of existing structures. Finally, as you just said, President, security is not given and we need to invest in it and never take it for granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Katainen.
Arvoisa puhemies.
Chair, thank you to Mr. President Niinistö for a very impressive report, which is a good basis for our further debate. The essential idea in our comprehensive security is that every one of us has a role in building our security in our societies. All of our actors in society must be involved. The public authorities, industry and the third sector, as well as the citizens themselves. The means are often very practical. If there is not enough food, no electricity or water in the home, or the mobile network does not work. Mr. President, preparedness is wisdom. In addition to military preparedness, there is also a regional dimension in overall security. Many regions of Europe are being depopulated as the population ages and young people move to the growth centers. Regional inequalities are increasing. This is particularly worrying on the EU's eastern borders, where the threat from the east is the greatest. So we must remember that the vibrant regions and the people who live in them are the backbone of our comprehensive security.
Mr. Zikenvicius, please.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, dear President Niinistö. First of all, of course, thank you for this report. A timely call to redefine how we approach crisis preparedness. With global tensions on the rise, Europe can no longer rely on old assumptions about security guarantees. While NATO remains our cornerstone, Europe needs to take on more responsibility. And your report captures this urgency, pointing out that EU must move beyond ad hoc solutions and fragmented defence strategies. We hope with the new commissioner appointed for defence, EU countries must better use their funds. EU countries spend roughly 240 billion each year on defence, but much of this is duplicated among member states. So that's why joint procurement across the EU is essential. And I also welcome the proposal for a single operational EU crisis management centre. This would be an essential step to unify our efforts, especially as we face increasingly sophisticated hybrid threats. This is not just about efficiency, it's about cementing our global credibility and influence. Thank you.
Mrs. Demirel.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. Catastrophes, flooding, climate killer, that is what's determining our daily life. And we need to act against that by having strong protection and prevention. So what occurs to you? Now, in this area, we're talking about militarization, that we want to speak with unions. However, when we have negotiation rounds, you're not participating. So after years and years of austerity, ladies and gentlemen, now you're saying, right now we have to militarize all areas of life. Imagine if the Federal Republic had reduced funding for civil protection, but then asking everyone for 4% for more civil protection. Why are we talking about rearming? Why are we talking about being on a war footing? What we need is social security. That's the only way we can approach the climate issues. That's how we're going to prevent catastrophes, and that's how we're going to work in a preventative action. We need to have civil protection promoted.
Thank you, Special Advisor Niinistö. Thank you very much for your detailed report on Europe's military preparedness and readiness in civilian and military affairs. We support your targets wholeheartedly. However, what about qualified risk assessment? For example, when it comes to the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine was not an unexpected occurrence. Experts warned about this war in 2014 because this has been predicted. But then there's this transatlantic illusion. the USA, under new leadership, will focus on China and will pay less attention to Europe and NATO. But what we have here is unqualified risk assessment.
Mr. von der Schulenburg. Thank you.
Lassen Sie mich mit Latein anfangen.
Let me start. Sic vis pacem para bellum. So if you want to have peace, you have to prepare for war. And since I've been in this parliament, we keep hearing this Roman wisdom in order to defend arming the EU. And I'm convinced that this militarization is not going to lead to peace, that in fact it's going to we're not to be able to carry out European integration. That we believe this from the Roman times, that says a lot. This is perverse, because Rome was not a democracy. They had slaves. It was built based on military strength, and they exploited other countries. That cannot be an example for us here in the EU. And then the second point, that we're recalling a phrase from 2,000 years ago. It doesn't reflect reality. And back then they were fighting with swords and spears. Now we have nuclear weapons, we have drones, we have cyber war. You can't even compare these two epochs. And then when we say this, that we should have food for 72 hours, then I think we're not going to survive the Third World War with that. So let me say that this is an important document for us, which is the UN Charter. And that obligates all of us to negotiate, to resolve conflicts and to end wars. So I would encourage all of you to stop preparing for this war. Thank you.
Mr. Muresan.
Thank you, President. Dear colleagues, during the European election campaign, we have saw clearly that citizens in Europe prioritize security and defense. People of Europe want to feel safe within the borders of the 27 member states of the Union, and they expect us to do more in the area of security and defense. We are facing many risks. Autocrats outside of the European Union are cooperating stronger than we anticipated, irrespective of their ideology. They are also trying to find support inside the borders of the European Union. There are security risks from us deriving from the Middle East, from Africa, and of course from the Russian Federation. We need to be better prepared, and one of the most essential tools that we have as a European Union is the budget of the European Union. Our budget needs to reflect our political priorities, and safety, security and defense has become a political priority. This is why, in line with the proposals put forward by President Sauli Niinistö, we have to adopt a multi-annual financial framework of the European Union for the next 7 years, where security and defense is a priority, where we allocate significant resources. We have to balance the old traditional priorities, which are still important, with the new priorities, which are, of course, digitization, tackling climate change, but first and foremost, security and defense. A euro spent on security and defense at European level can produce more results than a euro spent at national level for divergent interests and divergent priorities between member states. And to conclude, in order to also be able to respond better to unforeseen developments, we need a flexible budget of the European Union. The budget is always decided for 7 years. That's a long period of time. There are always unexpected developments. We need a budget which is flexible and capable to react. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monsieur Clergeau.
Mr. Clergeau, please.
Chers collègues,
Colleagues, preparedness for crises is something that all of society has to undertake together, and that is what is at the core of Mr. Niinistő's report. It is crucial. We need social cohesion and citizen rallying, focusing on associations, but trade unions as well, citizen involvement in civil protection and in solidarity forces that are close to communities. This is fundamental. I'd like to look at local authorities, regional authorities, and municipalities without whom there is no preparedness to crises. And then we need to focus on vulnerabilities. If we do not take full cognizance of the vulnerabilities, environmental, social, and local. We will not be able to tailor-make our preparedness for each local community, and we will see that a disaster will not have the same impact on one region on the other. And just a word on the hard right. No European security, defense, or solidarity. Their message is clear. That means Europe alone into tiny little pieces, incapable of rising to the challenges of climate change. Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you very much, Madam President. Well, you can write as many reports as you want, but we are not going to defend ourselves against these crises through these. No, we need determination. Well, go to Spain and look at a youth organisation that after the floods in Valencia had thousands of volunteers and trucks going from Madrid to Valencia without €1 of public money. And this was done within 24 hours. Well, go to Chiba and Pata Roja and ask those people there who helped them. There weren't officials with tax-free salaries, and no one asked them about gender mainstreaming. No, there were volunteers there who were dedicated to helping people. Then, in Spain, for example, the Spanish government rejected help of France. But for 40 years, they have been criticising soldiers. Perhaps we should not give somebody like Teresa Vera the task of dealing with it. Thank you.
Anna Maya. Mrs. Eriksson, it's for you. Mr. Zille is not there, so thank you.
Värderade talman. Vice President, thank you very much to President Niinistö for a very valuable report. Right now we're living in a critical time and it's necessary to be ready for all kinds of scenarios. Also, if you think it's unlikely, President Niinistö's report ought to act as an alarm bell for the EU, that there's a lot we can do to security, to ensure our society's resilience and to react to crises. We have to act now. We have to strengthen our preparedness. When we talk about preparedness in broad sense, we have to talk about all the different actors, from the individual, the companies, local and regional authorities, and defense forces. Information has to be shared much more rapidly among member states in the EU, and this total defense way of approaching it is very important. So we have to be, it's wise to be prepared also for unlikely events, and that's what we should be doing in the EU. Thank you very much to President Niinistö.
Eriksson, you have a blue card from Mr. Guzenina. You wish to take it?
Yes, I can take it.
Arvoisa puheenjohtaja.
President, the speech by President Niinistö was extremely wise here. We must be prepared, but we must be able to cooperate better. I would like to ask you, what is the way that we would be able to blow some Finnish spirit into the European Parliament after these latest divisions? We are fighting now that we would need cooperation so that we would be able to confront these extreme challenges that we have in front of us in the future years.
Edustaja, me suomalaiset, me tiedämme, että
Thank you. We Finns, we know that we must work together when we are facing a crisis. This we are used to, and this is the spirit that we must be able to transfer. So we're in this.
Also have to strengthen the EU's resilience, and we can do it together. I believe that. Olen aivan varma siitä.
I am completely convinced that we're able to do this. Every single one of us must understand that we are important when we are discussing resilience and comprehensive preparedness. Thank you for this excellent question.
Thank you, Mr. Van Lanschot. Thank you.
We have been asleep. For decades, our countries have been in a geopolitical sleep. Under the military blanket of the United States, we dreamt of an everlasting peace. In 2008, the first alarm clock went off. Russia invaded Georgia. So what did EU countries do? We hit snooze. When Russia invaded Crimea, we hit snooze. When Trump was elected and shouted America first, we hit snooze. And in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine again, the loudest alarm went off. But European countries slowly, only very slowly, started waking up. And now the sirens are ringing again with the re-election of the Orange Man across the sea. Therefore, I have one message to EU governments. Wake up. Get out of your pajamas and finally take charge of our own destiny. Abolish the veto, invest jointly in our defense and help Ukraine win. Stop the short-sighted nationalism. Let's unite. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kilonen, please.
Arvoisa puhemies.
Sure. Europe is consisted of its member states and its citizens. Without the trust of the citizens, trust between us, we cannot act. It is clear that we need different solutions. Everything from enforcing our defense capacity to stronger action against climate change. But reinforcing our citizens' capability to act is important. Education, dissemination of information, and being prepared for different threats. Media literacy, as well as filtering information. We are being influenced all the time. The crisis starts from all of us. Let's build trust. Let's be ready to listen to each other and find solutions, because we're all able to cause problems. Our future generations deserve more, and this is why we should be cooperating more and be able to resolve more problems instead of causing them.
Mr. Snitniewski.
Szanowni Państwo, o ile zmiana podejścia do obrony...
Thank you very much. We do need a change in paradigm as regards our defense capabilities, but I agree, but we do not need to merge or pool our capabilities or intelligence services. Not every country borders Russia. We, Poland, Baltic states, we do not need more authorities, more agencies. We need more assistance and attention paid to the war that we are waging already. Our military are defending our border with Belarus, and defense must start at the lowest possible level. We know such examples from history when small, agile, well-equipped forces were able to defend against overwhelming armies. Ukraine, at the beginning of the invasion, would give out weapons in the streets to its citizens. And what happened? With all respect, a Portuguese man or woman will not defend Poland as well as a Pole would. We need a small, efficient army, not a Moloch.
This debate is especially timely, and I thank former Prime Minister Niinistö for his excellent work. A new reality is upon us. A second Trump White House is now confirmed, and this reshapes our security landscape. This morning the focus is on military preparedness and safeguarding Europe's security. In addition to this, we also must recognise the potential substantial funding gap in military assistance to Ukraine should President Trump follow through on his campaign pledges. This gap is significant. We must therefore ask the question, is the MFF still fit for purpose in 2024? As my colleague Murison said, we need an urgent review and reassessment to ensure that Europe can meet our security demands while also responding to the impacts on global trade that Trump's isolationist and protectionist agenda may cause. This will have a major impact on key EU sectors like steel, agriculture and manufacturing. Additional contributions may well be necessary to safeguard Europe's security while sustaining and even expanding support for these vital industries. Finally, I welcome the reports highlighting of the need to protect our critical infrastructure, especially our subsea cables, which carry 97% of global communications and around €10 trillion in financial transactions daily. With three-quarters of northern cables passing through Irish waters, we have a unique responsibility. Ireland is committed to safeguarding these vital assets through collaboration with our EU and other partners, because in these challenging times our security is deeply intertwined.
Thank you. You have a blue card. You wish to accept it?
Yeah, I take a blue card. Yeah.
Okay. I will speak Polish. Please take a chance. Okay. Bardzo uważnie.
Thank you very much, sir. It was with great attention that I listened to you. You mentioned twice in your speech President Trump. You represent the biggest group in the parliament, EPP. So let me ask you this, sir. What would you advise your political group how to organize our relations with President Trump in the US? The EU, of course, is a very important bloc, but the US is an extremely important country. So what is the position of your group, sir, as regards transatlantic relations in terms of defense? Let me stress defense.
Yes, we are committed to democracy, we are committed to diplomacy, and we recognise that President Trump was elected by a majority in the United States. So our group, I think, will be working to recognise that, to try and find where we have common interests, and particularly I think Mr. Trump will have to reflect on the situation in Ukraine now that North Korea has joined in the war. That changes, I think, the dynamic substantially, but also if we do not have collaboration with Mr. Trump, then we'll have to be more sustainable and more independent as a bloc.
Thank you very much.
We'll approach it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. Mrs. Parin, please.
El informe ministro es oportuno.
This report is timely because it looks at the threats that we have: cyber attacks, military attacks, sabotage to our infrastructure, climate crises like we've seen in Spain. But what we really have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be better prepared? The report says that this would be built in a way that we strengthen our capabilities, but make sure that also the global south does so. So we have to do it with the world. And in the pandemic, we realized that our safety comes also from the safety of the global south. The report shows that the Commission must work in a coordinated and effective way. We need early alerts and make the right decisions to prevent and save lives, as we did in 2018 in Valencia, but not now. We have to have the best and true information, making sure that we factor in science in our political decisions. And only if we're able to better understand, then we will have and we also need a better integration of the Global South in our decisions. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the first Draghi report and now the Niinistö report, the EU is very creative when trying to take away power from national states, because that's the program of the EU: more competence for the EU, more centralization, more uniformity, until we finally have the achievement of this goal of a European country. And they're using this, but this is really just an attack against democracy and the sovereignty of member states. And so we have to force countries to have even more debt because they have to pay more for their different obligations. And this time it's the armament industry which is in the focus, of course, in hand with a NATO, which is a no-go for a neutral country like Austria. So they're trying to create a censorship and indoctrination of the citizens in order to have the right opinions. What does this mean? That means any criticism is called an attack against democracy. So we're trying to have no to more competence for the EU, yes to have more coordination for security policy. Thank you.
Arvoisa puhemies.
Mr. President Niinistö, I wish to thank you for the work you have done for Finland and everything you've done for the EU. This report is a gift for us. It is a very new alarm clock made by President Niinistö. If we let Ukraine lose the war, the present member states are next in line. If the tanks were to cross the border over your country's border today, or the critical infrastructure were destroyed, would you be able to act? Do you have enough food and water? Your bank card doesn't work. Even during the pandemic, we could see that this was difficult. Do you have batteries, candles, and generators if there is no electricity? Do you know where the closest shelter is, and is there one in general? Are you mentally and physically prepared to protect yourself and your family? At the same time, when the member states must carry their own responsibility in preparing themselves for this, the society is in a central role and every one of us in a central position.
Kubowsko, please.
Pani Przewodnicząca.
Dear Chair, ladies and gentlemen, President Niinistö, thank you very much for your timely and very wise report. Dear friends, dear Finns, you are an example to us. You have managed to create a program of preparedness that engages everyone. Every individual person feels responsible for the defense of its country. We have 900,000 Finns in auxiliary service. This is really impressive. Engaging the individuals is absolutely crucial at the situation like this, when we have cyber attacks, we have war being waged on our borders. Poland is also a wonderful example. We will spend 4.7% of GDP next year on defense, not because it pleases us, but because it's necessary. We have also packed an act on civil preparedness, and I'm happy that we are united on those important matters. We are all responsible for being prepared for what comes tomorrow.
Mrs. Gregorova, please.
Dear colleagues, every couple of years we get a new report that tells us basically the same points. Spend more on being prepared for disasters. This year's report is no different, but the circumstances are very different. We cannot rely on the US anymore. We cannot rely on Russia and China remaining cooperative players anymore. And thus we cannot continue to pretend that 27 member states, some as small as mid-sized cities, all need a veto when it comes to foreign policy and to our common defence. That illusion must go. I am in favour of improving our capacity for deterrence by denial and deterrence by punishment. However, you should not mistake the breaking of encrypted communication as some kind of advantage for our cybersecurity. A backdoor for the good guys is a backdoor for our enemies. That is why Mr. Niinistö probably felt compelled to add this sentence without undermining cybersecurity. Well, that's like swimming without getting wet. Just don't. Thank you.
Thank you, Monsieur Botenga, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Botenga, please. Colleagues, every time I hear with the defence budget we're not able to defend ourselves, I wonder, what are we doing with this money? We're spending more on defence than Russia, than South Africa, than Brazil, but apparently with that we're not able to defend ourselves. This is quite amazing. Now, one thing that we do agree on is that today public authorities in Europe are not able to protect their citizens. And every time there is a problem or a climate or environmental disaster, this is the case. We had forest fires across Europe, southern Europe, in the summer. We weren't able to provide aeroplanes to put out these fires. Apparently this wasn't a priority. People prefer to produce new fighter jets. We've seen the damages caused by austerity. We had floods in Belgium, and the previous government, what did they do? They cut 4 out of 6 of the civil protection barracks. We need to invest in civil protection in our hospital. That should be our priority, and not militarization.
Thank you. Mr. Galler, please.
President, colleagues, arvoisa herra presidentti Niinistö, thank you very much for this excellent report. The need to enhance Europe's civilian and military defense preparedness and readiness is obvious, and he rightly described the facts. Putin sees the West as weak, and his logical conclusion is we must change this perception. This requires several things. First, as he formulated, the trust of citizens that the political institutions, meaning our democracies, are worth to be protected. Second, it requires political leadership in our respective countries to tell the citizens the truth and the full scale of the threats that we are exposed to. And there are many that have been enumerated in the report, and it is not only about a full-scale war. Third, it requires action, coordinated action, and again I quote, "Strengthening Europe's defence is an urgent and monumental task." We try to address it with supportive legislation here in the Parliament, but we also need to learn from countries like Finland, to compare notes and assess what is best practice, how we can raise resilience and get civilian and military preparedness and readiness from theory into practice. Putin won't wait if we allow him to win in Ukraine. Supporting Ukraine now is the best way to give us the time to prepare our civilian and military structures not to be considered too weak by the aggressor and thereby deter him from any further reaching sinister thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You have a blue card. Do you wish to take? Blue card? Yes. Card.
In which language?
Mr. Jungblut?
Sprechen.
Yeah.
I have a question, because a lot has been said today, and you also mentioned that we're talking about a lot of protection measures, for example, protecting critical infrastructure. But as Germans, we know that recently there was a critical infrastructure attack, and that is the Nord Stream pipeline. And it was not our alleged enemies who did so, but it seems as though the Ukraine might have been done that. At least that's the suspicion. And so some people have welcomed the explosion. So tell me why, in your group, why are our enemies a bigger danger to us than our own friends? Yes, I can tell you that Russia has an aggressive war of aggression against Ukraine. I don't know if it was Ukraine. You apparently know better, but I don't know if it is Ukraine. But even if it was Ukraine, it was a legitimate objective in order to prevent Russia from getting money from that source. So that was quite clear. The aggressor, well, don't switch this role of victim-aggressor.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Lopez Aguilar. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Gracias, Presidente. Thank you very much, Madam President. Here in the European Parliament, we're discussing the Niinistö report on how to improve and strengthen preparedness and readiness from the EU for political, climate crises and technological crises and hybrid threats as well, because these are increasingly intense. Now, this needs raising awareness. We also need to communicate more. But the EU also needs to move out of its comfort zone. In the debate with the High Representative, Mr. Borrell. We talked about the comeback of Mr. Trump to the White House, and we made it very clear there that Europe needs to move out of its comfort zone and needs to be able to react. And with this report, there are proposals to improve its defence and security with increases in investment, sharing intelligence. But one thing that is very clear, and I will be concluding here, is the need to strengthen the solidarity and civil protection mechanisms to deal with the climate disasters which are increasingly frequent, such as we've seen in Valencia with so many deaths and victims. This could have been avoided with better management. And we also need to have more funding. Thank you.
I ask you to respect the time a little bit at least. Thank you. Mrs. Pokorna Germanova, thank you.
Vážení kolegové.
Colleagues, Europe is facing a major challenge and it should show that it's able to act. We need to be self-sufficient in technology. We need robust industrial capacity and we need information sharing mechanisms between the public and the private sector. Instead of that, industry is being delocalized outside of Europe where there's lower energy and lower taxes and when the rules are not so strict. Coordinated action with the current rules is impossible to enact. That's what we need to change. We need to share information faster and take competent decision upon that information. The European Council decides, the European Commission acts, and the Parliament controls. That's as simple as that. We need to take the future of our continent in our hands. Fundamental change will be necessary, but you've selected a bad leader for that, and in a couple of days you are going to approve of a commission that will not be able to achieve those goals. Thank you.
Stimați colegi, cea mai eficientă armă împotriva amenințării.
Now, the most effective weapon against external threats is simply development. The efforts that you take to develop countries, that is cohesion. And I think this is something I can support. Developing societies, solidarity and development. These, of course, depend on the leaders. And we've had very bad experience during the pandemic and then the war on the border of the EU. That has cost us a lot, and it's cost a lot of lives and material and money. And of course, we have this policy where decisions are being made taking other factors into consideration. In other words, we have to talk about basic rights, transparency, but the elite has ideological motivations that they're following. And I have to say we should not fall to that temptation to continue in this way. Mrs. von der Leyen's intention, this new strategy of preparedness, that's exactly what it means. We have to be prepared for difficult times. It's very important that we reduce inequality, which is at the very heart of this political structure.
Thank you. You are out of time. I'm very sorry. I hate to do that, but this is too much, really. Really. One sentence, just do it quickly. You're lucky.
One sentence is, okay, you're fortunate. Thank you. It's my lucky day. We have to prepare ourselves for difficult times, which are arriving. But it's important that we address this inequality at the very heart of this structure. Thank you, says the President.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Not going to give it again to you, too honestly. Thank you very much. Mr. Fasile, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I will speak in Romanian. Astăzi vă vorbesc nu doar ca politician.
Today, I will speak not just as a politician, but as a citizen of Bucharest, where there is a high risk of earthquake, the highest in the EU. since in 1977, there were 11,000 casualties because of an earthquake, and it is sure that we will have another one. Nearly 50 years later, the majority of schools were built following that. That means 10,000 schools and half of our hospitals in Romania. 12 million children and patients are therefore exposed to this risk. If another earthquake like the one in 1977 were to take place, the disaster would be fatal. No country can face this alone. There are the need for shelters, coordination across the EU. Now, we ask the Parliament, the Commission, and national authorities to increase investment. Thank you.
Takis, please. Thank you. Try to stick to the time because we vote at 11 o'clock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Niinistö, for this report. I appreciate that it was written by President of Finland. As much of what we Latvians know about civil defense readiness, we actually learn from Finland. This is a special week for Latvians, as we are not only celebrating our independence, but also remembering our freedom fighters. Our National Guard has launched a new campaign called My Latvia, My Responsibility. Mana Latvija, Mana Atbildība. It speaks to responsibilities we have as citizens toward our country. When I became the mayor of Riga, we introduced something entirely new to the city, an exercise on what to do in event of military attack. The Niinistö report calls for this type of training and exercise culture to be introduced across the EU. Most importantly, it reflects our key responsibilities, ensuring our community and institutions are resilient against any kind of threat, because it's our Europe, our responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Papas, please.
Madam President, dear colleagues, now you say that the European Union has to invest 20% of its total budget, and that is really large sums of money for security and defense. So I have to say, financing the EU for strategic and military expenses, of course, more countries in Europe, you find the situation where there's greater poverty. And of course, there's even more problem with underfinancing the health systems in Europe. So I have to say, let's think about the logic behind this. How do we create peace? Through democracy, via diplomacy, not with irrational spending on. So we have to fight at the table and not in the field.
Thank you. Mr. Mendel, please.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, I want to, in particular, thank Mr. Niinistö for the report. After the Draghi report and the Letta report on our competitiveness, we now have an excellent report on our preparedness militarily and in civilian matters against future crises. And this is timely, and this is important, and this is crucial, and it's even essential for nothing less but our civilization, which has been attacked for many years with military means from outside, with means of hybrid warfare from outside, and also from inside via disinformation, hate speech, ideologies of various kinds, and populism. So we need this kind of resilience in order to preserve what we have inherited from generations before us in terms of human dignity, freedom, rule of law, democracy, separation of powers, parliamentarism, as we conduct the parliamentary exercise also today here. This is what we have to defend, and this is what is outlined in this excellent report we are discussing today. Our future threats come when they come from outside, from Tehran and Moscow, from North Korea, from terrorism, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism when they come from inside, from the alignment with such powers from outside, and also from populistic developments within the member states. To confront these threats means to hand over to the next generation a good Europe as we have inherited a good Europe ourselves.
Thank you, Monsieur Germain. Merci.
Mr. Germain, please.
Mes chers collègues,
colleagues, who would believe that Trump's U.S. would support Ukraine's efforts in the war? Who could believe that Putin would never attack the 27 members? Who could believe that what happened in Valencia with climate extreme events are not going to multiply, much like cyber attacks, amongst others? Yes, us in Europe, we are exposed to an unprecedented attacks that could threaten our very integrity. Now, if we are to then look at this as only an EU response, and there's a blind spot in terms of financing, according to the report, Mr. President. So we need to look at our action. Let us break taboos. We're talking about several hundreds of billions. We don't need them in a decade's time, but we're going to need them now. So new resources and a huge scale. The security issues are a threat to the EU project. Let us be up to the task.
Mr. Nikolic.
Chers collègues,
colleagues, you talk about crises. So let's talk about the biggest crisis. Yes, the migration crisis, which is shaking Europe. It threatens our security and endangers our identities. This report says that migration could be instrumentalized by hostile countries and could be a threat. But what is the European Union doing to manage this migration crisis? You are funding associations and NGOs which are pro-migration, and including those who are working off the coast of Libya. You're forcing European nations to accept these migrants based and distribute them across the continent. And you are using a failed policy with the money of French and European taxpayers. You're giving millions to Turkey, to Tunisia, to Egypt. And there are 700,000 illegal immigrants in France. This is the equivalent of the population of Athens, and this is not working. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Veriga, please.
President, colleagues, the report by Mr. Niinistö is a wake-up call for us. It speaks about what would happen to us if we don't have a plan in the case of an attack. The document is mentioned in the mission letter of Commissioner Lahib, but nothing is said about the health sector. What would happen if we face with a sanitary crisis? It is also related to external threats. The EU is planning to strengthen its defense industry, but we are not speaking about health. Military mobility is very good because infrastructure and mobility can help us to solve many problems. As we prepare for external threats, we also should think about the health sector and our preparedness. Thank you.
Yes, Madam President. Well, first of all, I just want to thank President Niinistö for the excellent and very timely report. I think to write, it was probably rather difficult, because the most difficult thing was to treat Vladimir Putin like a natural disaster or a climate change. But nevertheless, it's accomplished. And what we can follow from this report, there are 3 points of action I want to mention. First of all, the European funds, the main instrument of the European Union, must be made available to strengthen our preparedness. Right now, let me remind you, colleagues, many European funds exclude not only military purposes, but also dual use. This is about structural funds, about Horizon Europe, and things like that. The second thing is we really need to strengthen the EU and NATO interface, especially in cases of emergency, just like noted in the Niinistö report. And the third thing is the EU budget is not enough to reactivate the European defence industry. We need to incentivize the private investment, to provide long-term perspective for defence industry, and to help increase our competitiveness and our welfare. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ressler, please. So you're informed. I close the Catch the Eye procedure. Thank you.
Europa nije spremna.
Europe is not ready. Is not ready mentally or in terms of real capacities for this new reality. We are living in a very dangerous world. Our global rivals and sometimes even partners are looking at us and see us as a fragile force which is lost in political games. The reports from Mr. Draghi and Mr. Letta say that we need to change fundamentally and that we need to strengthen our security. Europe is becoming aware of the risks of an armed aggression and of hybrid and cyber attacks. We are becoming aware that if we want to live in peace, we will have to be stronger than we are today. It is one thing to be aware of that only conceptually. However, this is no longer enough. We have to act. We have to limit the regulation and enable our companies to work. We have to invest in defense spending.
Colleagues, on Tuesday we mark 1,000 days since Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And I still remember very vividly those who in February 2022 said that Ukraine won't survive for 3 days, that it's not worth sending weapons. But Ukraine has proven those people wrong. For almost 1,000 days, the Ukrainian David is resisting the Russian Goliath. And why? Because the Ukrainian people were prepared, because they are resilient, because they have recognized the threat and they had not allowed themselves to be divided. And these, colleagues, are the lessons that we must draw from the Niinistö report as well. We are threatened by Russia, by climate change, by pandemics. That is reality. But reality is also that we can overcome these challenges if we recognize them openly, if we believe in our own strength, and if we do not allow ourselves to be divided. Social cohesion and unity in diversity, that is resilience, and that, colleagues, is Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kremer, please.
In an security and strategic environment that is deteriorating, Europe is not up to responding to crises. But then, every time there is a crisis, they try to have a power grab. Now, things that are forgotten from this report, Islamization and this flow of immigration that is sapping our freedoms, our security, and our identity. Just one point in this report that I think is laughable. The EU is asking citizens to come up with stockpiles to be able to be self-sufficient for 72 hours. So we're supposed to have canned goods to be able to survive for 72 years. And then meanwhile, with the Green Deal and FTAs, the EU has destroyed our food sovereignty. And in this area and in other areas, to be prepared for crisis, you really shouldn't trust the EU. We should trust our nations and our citizens.
Merci.
Thank you.
Please.
Arvoisa rouva puhemies.
Chair, thank you to President Niinistö for this report on improving Europe's crisis preparedness. I dare to say that history and geography have taught us Finns how to prepare for many kinds of crises. Traditionally, both as families and as a nation, we have been prepared for a rainy day, as the saying goes. For example, in Finland, we have a Security of Supply Act, and we have a Center for Security of Supply, which is responsible for planning and operational activities in the country's security of supply. It covers medicine, food, energy, as well as regional contingency plans with local authorities. It is important that we Europeans understand the holistic nature of our security, which is not only military. We must enforce our infrastructure and improve our autonomy in all aspects of our society so that when unexpected crises arise, we were better prepared for them. And this is where the report provides us with good guidelines.
Thank you, Madam. Preparedness must be costly, but the price of being unprepared is far higher. I think that is the main message presented by the wonderful report from Mr. Niinistö. This is the one I will retain. The second one is that we have to raise the awareness of the whole civil society in order to face the real risks going across the board. That means at the same time that we have to make a sense of urgency and to speed up the crisis preparedness and readiness of our instruments in the European Union and to cooperate and coordinate with the member states to be fit for the purpose. I welcome the high level of ambition of this report that goes across all the possible hazards, but I think that we should focus on the resilience of the critical infrastructures and key services, especially countering cyber attacks, hybrid threats and massive disinformation campaigns. That demands a lot of investment and a lot of cutting-edge technology in order to be prepared for all these eventualities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Negrescu, please.
Europe needs to wake up. We face unexpected and unpredictable times, and European leaders must be more realistic in the way they design policies and how we build the future of the European Union. The report is right. The war in Ukraine, the conflict in the Middle East, the threat of Russia and China, and the growth of the far right are harming us. Europe needs to invest more in our military and civil preparedness, but the EU also needs to do more for our citizens, protecting our democratic values, listening to people while explaining to them the options and why we unfortunately need to make all of us further efforts. What are we fighting for if not for our people? In order to be able to maintain peace, we need to prepare for all circumstances, but no one will follow us if Europe is blocked by minor political interest, bureaucracy burden, or the arrogance some are showing. If we build trust, Europe will be trustworthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Simon, please.
Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we must confront the fact that in defense, Europe is utterly unprepared. The numbers are clear. While the European Union maintains 178 different weapon systems, the United States operates with 27. Our defense industry is paralyzed by inefficiencies and fragmentation. In supporting Ukraine, we have procured 80% of our military supplies from outside the European market. That doesn't make sense. Last November, President von der Leyen put forward urgently needed reforms to strengthen the European Defence Agency and accelerate industry production. So far, member states have shown an alarming lack of engagement. Putin sees the West as weak. That we must change. We Europeans, ladies and gentlemen, must move beyond the zero-sum game of national interests and become capable of defending ourselves.
Thank you. Mr. Nemec, please.
Spoštovani visoki.
Ladies and gentlemen, the consequences of climate change are worse every year. We also have over 50 armed conflicts raging throughout the world, which showcase the dark side of human nature. It would be naive to believe that they have no consequences, both at the moral level as well as more tangible consequences. Strengthening the joint European strategy for civil and defense preparedness is therefore vital. We need to be able to predict, prevent, manage and respond to all threats. This is key to our security. But more than ever, we need a strategy of peace, a strategy allowing us to end the war in Ukraine, to stop genocide in Gaza, to stop the attacks on innocent civilians in Lebanon and the entire Middle East. And also one providing humanitarian aid to these people, allowing them to stay home in their own countries. We need to provide a peaceful future for all generations to come, particularly our children. Thank you.
Chiswo, please.
Thank you. I will be speaking Polish. Pani Przewodnicząca, drodzy koledzy.
President, colleagues, under one flag of the EU, we see a multicultural community of countries based on such values as rule of law, free trade and human rights. For our community to be strong, we need swift actions, good tools, specific action steps. Europeans want a common security policy in all areas of life. The EU must have a toolbox allowing us to defend ourselves, for instance, against cyber attacks. The EU must wake up. Today, EU's borders are under attack. The Polish-Belarusian border sees open war. So if you want peace, get ready for war, as the proverb says. The EU must draw up and prepare a early alarm system, and today, more than any time, we need support. Poland. Speaker interrupts.
Very much. Thank you, Mrs. Picerno.
Thank you very much, President. What's at stake here is something that is at stake for the world and for democracies, because autocracies seem that they are poised in terms of quick decision-making. And we have a really challenging balance before us. How can we take the complexity of our democracies with the swiftness of decisions that we need to make when needed? This report, I think, is a clear way forward in terms of what the future of the EU, what we need to do for peace and security. More cooperation amongst intelligence, military, production, and to be able to act quickly when needed. Joint expenditure for defense, these are things that we can no longer delay. It is a priority and has to be a priority for our political families, such that the Europe's future is precisely what needs to be built through our common future. Thank you.
Procedure will go as far as we can, and we will start with Mr. Tonin. Thank you.
I come from a family where in the past 3 generations fought in various wars. My great-grandfather fought in the First World War, my grandfather fought in the Second World War, and my father is a veteran of the Slovenian Independence War. I am the 4th generation for which it seemed that it will not be touched by war in any way. But the Russian invasion of Ukraine has shown that even in the 21st century, peace in Europe is not a given. That is why it is our duty to invest in defense capabilities and build a credible system of deferral and a system of peace. The message we received today is an important reminder that it's not enough to build military capacities. We need to also prepare our societies for potential conflicts.
Mr. Cepeda, thank you. Mr. Cepeda. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Colleagues, the Niinistö report is extraordinarily interesting. It deals with the threats that we are facing today. I'd like to highlight two particular aspects of this report. First of all, the capacity to coordinate intelligence between our countries, and secondly, developing a protective shield to focus on the defence of our citizens. And this is not only done via investment. It's not just about investing in defence, it's also done by investing in a change of attitude and mentality. That here this morning, we can see that there are some members of this Parliament who have a mentality which is more akin to that of the Second World War, and we need the opposite of that. Therefore, it's extremely important. We need to safeguard our intelligence systems, we need to share information, and let's protect ourselves against the threats which are going to be very important in the future. Thank you.
I will call Mr. Kartheiser, please. Please, colleague, there are still people speaking. Thank you.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam President. According to our treaties, the EU is not set to become a military union. Without treaty amendment by the member states, any type of military aspect would violate our treaties. And this report is a way of going around the national parliaments and the will of the people. In 54, we would like to move beyond democracy. This defense approach goes beyond cooperation in security aspects. It violates the neutrality of Austria and Ireland. We are ignoring referenda and state treaties. Transforming the EU into a military alliance that would just be apprenticed to NATO makes Ukraine membership of the EU impossible, because if it were to survive war, it would have to be neutral. Ladies and gentlemen, if we want to be better prepared for crises, we should do that by respecting democracy and our treaties. Thank you.
Papadakis, please. Where is he? Mr. Papadakis.
Now, this report, it's a very cynical collection of different arguments concerning the current situation. It's the worst time since the Second World War when you're preparing for defense people against dangers and instability. But who are the victims? And we have to continue working under the imperialism of the U.S., China, and the ruling classes. This is very dangerous, of course. Of course, civilian protection, guidance for all households, that you have to have food sufficient for 3 days. And then we have member states in the EU having plans for war. So you have to pay huge amounts of money for militarization. This is going to be paid by the taxpayers, people who are suffering from hunger and poverty. So it's very important that this is really just a question of the armaments industry. And of course, you have to resist imperialistic war.
Colleagues, please, we have still 2 people to talk. Thank you. Mr. Sousa Silva, thank you. Please speak loud.
Madam President, colleagues, decades of lack of investment in defense in the EU has left us completely vulnerable. The Niinistö report focuses on the urgency of having a response capability that would have a military aspect and a civilian aspect. The proposal for bolstering the civil protection mechanism is something that I support, and it is a decisive step in that direction. We know of the disasters that have taken place in Europe, fires in Portugal, and now the floods in Valencia. And what we see is that there is a single aspect. The next MFF should be the financial instrument that in a cross-cutting way would be put to the service of this cause. Security is a public common good, and it is our primary responsibility so that all of the citizens of the European Union stand protected. Thank you.
Now to Mr. Andriukaitis. Thank you. Please, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Dear colleagues, nationalists, you have not understood that the Finnish people show an excellent thinking globally, acting locally. The nationalists in this room are thinking locally and acting locally, and that is a big mistake that cost dearly to those nationalists. So now we have to say very clearly that the Draghi report, Letta report, and Niinistö report show a very good example, acting globally, thinking globally, and acting united. As ever before, we need the defense union of the European Union, health union, security union of the European Union. This is what we need so that every city, every village, every capital can resist those huge challenges. Thank you.
The debate is now closed and the sitting is suspended for a few minutes until the votes. Thank you very much.